Today we will review for the Unit 3 test. In the 2008-2009 NCAA basketball season, the Duke Blue Devils men's basketball team finished with 11 wins and 5 losses in ACC conference play. Here are the outcomes of each game in order. What was Duke's longest streak during the season? If you look up here, the longest streak is right there, and it is 5. Suppose we want to test the following hypotheses. The outcomes of Duke basketball games were independent, and Duke was a streaky team. Explain what it means to claim that Duke was a streaky team. So that would mean that Duke's ability to win is higher following a win than a loss. Describe how to simulate the distribution of the longest streak for the Duke Blue Devils basketball team. So we're going to take 16 note cards and label 11W and 5L. Shuffle them and lay them out. Find the longest streak. Plot it on a dot plot and repeat many times. "25 trials of the simulation were conducted, assuming that the outcomes of the Duke Blue Devil basketball games were independent. Estimate the p-value." Their longest streak was 5. It's very important that you remember to look at the number of trials and don't automatically assume they're all out of 100. So there are 18 trials that are 5 or higher, and that comes out to be 72%. Is there convincing evidence that Duke was a streaky team? So our p-value is high, so we would fail to reject HO. We do not have convincing evidence. That Duke was a streaky team. Here are the results of the 34 regular season games for the WNBA's LA Sparks during 2009. Overall, their record was 18-16. How many streaks of 3 or more did they have during the season? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. To see if this number of streaks gives convincing evidence that the Sparks were a streaky team, what hypotheses should we test? So our HO would be the outcomes of the Sparks games were independent And our HA would be the Sparks are a streaky team. Describe how to simulate the distribution of the number of streaks of 3 or more. So we would take 34 note cards, and write W on 18 and L on 16. Shuffle them and lay them out. Count the number of streaks of 3 or more. Plot it on a dot plot and repeat many times. "100 trials of the simulation were conducted, assuming that the outcomes of the Sparks games were independent. The number of streaks of 3 or more was recorded for each trial, and then recorded on the dot plot below. Briefly describe what information is provided by the dot plot." So it shows the possible number of streaks of 3 or more, that could occur by random chance, assuming the outcomes of the Sparks games are independent. Is there convincing evidence at the 5% significance level that the LA Sparks were a streaky team? So we had 4 streaks of 3 or more. So we're going to go 4 and higher. And our p-value would then be 75%. So at 5%, that is not convincing evidence. So we would say no, because 75% were 4 or higher. It would have had to be less than 5 for it to have been significant. On quiz 1, we used the longest streak as our test statistic to investigate whether the Michigan State softball team was streaky. We can also test the same hypotheses using a different test statistic, the difference in winning percentages after a win and after a loss. So the table shows the different pairs that you could have: win-win, loss-win, loss-win, loss-loss. How much better did the Spartans perform after a win than after a loss? So they had 15 out of 27 where they won and then won again. They had 11 out of 28 where they lost first and then won. And that would give us a difference of 16.3%. State the hypotheses we are interested in testing. So our HO would be the outcomes of the Spartans' games. Are independent. And our HA would be the Spartans are a streaky team. "100 trials were conducted assuming that the outcomes were independent. The difference in winning percentage was recorded for each trial. Based on the results below, estimate the p-value and make a conclusion." So we had a difference of 16.3%. So that's going to be somewhere around here. So I get 27. So my p-value is 27 out of 100, or 27%. So with 27%, which is fairly high, we failed to reject HO. We do not have convincing evidence. That the Spartans are a streaky team. Based on your conclusion, what type of error could you have committed? Well, we failed to reject, so that would be a type 2 error. So we said that the outcomes of the Spartans' games were independent. But in reality, they were streaky. To determine whether you get the hot hand when shooting free throws, you decide to go to the gym and shoot pairs of free throws. After each pair of shots, you will walk to the other end of the court to shoot the next pair of free throws. When you are done, you will see if the difference in your shooting percentage after a made free throw and after a missed free throw produces statistically significant evidence that you had the hot hand. In this context, briefly describe what it means to be statistically significant. So, what it means is that We have convincing evidence that your ability to hit free throws after a made shot is greater than that after a missed shot. Describe a type 1 error in this context and what you can do to reduce the possibility of making this type of error. So, it would be when you reject HO for a type 1 error. So, it would be when I said there was convincing evidence that I was a streaky shooter. When in reality, my shots were independent. And so for a type 1 error, what we need to do is to decrease our significance level. For C, describe a type 2 error. That would be when I said my shots were independent. But in reality, I was a streaky shooter. The way you would correct this type of error would be to get more data. Suppose that when you get home from the gym, you conduct a hypothesis test and get a p-value of 3%. Interpret this value in context of the question. So it would be assuming my ability to make a shot is independent, I would expect a difference And in this case, we don't know what the difference actually was, so we would have to say at least as big as I observed. "3% of the time by random chance." If I use the 5% significance level, which error is it possible that you committed? Well, if I use the 5% and I got 3%, then that would mean I was lower, which would mean I had rejected HO. So that would be a type 2 error. I'm sorry, a type 1 error. I said that my shots were streaky. But in reality, they were independent.